Homeless to rich. 10 homeless people who struck gold. Number 10. Chris Pratt.
Mr. Pratt, sir, on your right, please.
Chris Pratt is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood today, starring in the Jurassic Worlds franchise, Guardians of the Galaxy, and plenty more. But it wasn't always easy for the actor, who fell on harder times before he got his first big break. He had graduated high school in 1997, but after taking a semester of acting classes at a community college, he dropped out. He then took a job as a discount ticket salesman, and even as a stripper. But when he was offered a chance to go to Hawaii, he took a one-way flight. When he got there, though, he didn't have anywhere to live, and at the age of 19, was forced to stay in a van by the beach while he worked part-time jobs. He once said in an interview that Maui is a pretty awesome place to be homeless, and that he'd spend most of his time drinking and smoking weed. He landed a job waiting tables at a Bubba Gump Shrimp Company restaurant, and one day was serving Rae Dawn Chong, an actress who was casting for her directorial debut. He convinced her he was worth a shot. She took him to LA, and the rest was history. Number 9. Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry was named by Forbes magazine in 2011 as the highest paid man in entertainment, and it seems like he's involved in everything. He now has his own production company and studio complex. But this success has been a long journey for him, and he had to take some serious risks along the way, some of which didn't work out so well. Despite people telling him he'd never succeed as a writer, he was determined to become a playwright. In 1992, upon moving to Atlanta, he took a job and put every cent he had into the launch of a play. He only expected up to 1,200 people to show up, but in the end, only 30 bought tickets. Since everything he had was tied up in the production's success, he ended up homeless and without a dollar to his name. He persevered, however, and returned to doing the show every year. On the 7th time of trying in 1998, his show was finally a success, and he went from strength to strength. Number 8. James Cameron. He's now one of the most famous movie directors in the world, but the man responsible for movies such as Avatar and Titanic had to make a number of sacrifices to get where he is today. In 1981, the only movie on his resume was Piranha 2: The Spawning, which wasn't exactly his finest moment. During its production in Italy, he became ill and had a nightmare where a mechanical arm dragged itself through a series of explosions while holding kitchen knives. And it was this that inspired his first blockbuster, Terminator. But getting this idea to the big screen took a serious amount of work. When he returned to LA, he was penniless and wasn't able to afford a permanent home. He stayed with friends and lived in his car while he wrote the first draft of the screenplay, and had to fire his agent, who didn't believe it was a good idea. Eventually, he managed to sell the script for The Terminator for $1, but with an important caveat. He was to be the director. As we all know, the film went on to become a knockout success, and he was on his way to becoming one of, if not the most successful director ever. Number 7. Jim Carrey. In 1974, at the age of 12, Jim Carrey found himself homeless when his father lost his job. They were both forced to live in a van, traveling to where his father might be able to pick up a few days of work, and it was an extremely difficult time for them both. Carrey described the experience as being a traumatic kick in the nuts, but one they thankfully managed to get through. It would, however, teach them the determination and the grit he needed to survive in the cutthroat world of Hollywood, and he feels that, without it, he would probably be working in the steel mill in Hamilton, Ontario. Number 6. Ted Williams. You probably know Ted Williams as a radio personality, voiceover artist, and a sportscaster. But he has lived a varied life, and his career since hitting the big time hasn't always gone to plan. He first became a radio DJ in the early 1980s and worked on a late-night show in Columbus, Ohio. He suffered from addiction problems, though, and was fired from his job in 1994 because of alcohol and drug abuse. This left him without a steady income and, as a result, without a home. He soon ended up living on the street and living a life of crime, and this looked to be how he would spend the rest of his life. His fortunes turned around in 2011 in a stroke of luck when a video went viral online of an interview with him when he was homeless. His voice was so pitch perfect for a role as an announcer that people around the world wanted to enlist his talents. Suddenly, he was receiving a steady influx of job offers and managed to turn his life around to become the star that we know today. Amongst all of the projects he's now involved in, he has set time aside to set up and run the Ted Williams Project, which is a charity dedicated to helping homeless shelters.
And we'll be back with more right after these words.
Before we move on, be sure to subscribe to Top 5s with notifications on. Number 5. Drew Carey. Drew Carey's career as a comedian and host began in 1985 when he was 27 years old. But his life prior to that was one of difficulty. He grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and spent time in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. When he was 18, though, he wanted to visit his brother who lived in Las Vegas at the time, and so embarked on a road trip across the country to get there. Once he had arrived, he was unable to find anywhere to live, so he ended up living in his car. He sold blood to raise vital funds and managed to find work as a bank teller and as a writer at Denny's. But this wasn't how he imagined his life being, so he made connections with people in the entertainment industry and started writing jokes for them. Eventually, by 1985, he was writing jokes for himself and had become the MC at the Cleveland Comedy Club after moving back home, and his career took off from there.
Oh, I'm real excited.
Number 4. Idris Elba. Idris Elba burst onto our scenes in the HBO series The Wire and has also starred in Luther before landing roles in some of the biggest movies of recent times. But you may be surprised to know that on his way to the top, he hit rock bottom. Elba had secured various minor roles on British TV in the 1990s, but decided to move to the US in the new millennium in search of larger roles. At first, this gamble didn't pay off, and he was forced to live in his van for 3 months. During this time, after 3 or 4 years without a job, he says he tried various drugs and was about to give up on his dreams. He watched Denzel Washington and Wesley Snipes in movies and kept telling himself that he was good enough to be right there with them on that level. But he struggled to get any interest. His wife was pregnant and expecting a child, and it was then that he was offered his role on The Wire. If he hadn't got it, he would have given up and moved back to the UK. We can all be glad that he didn't. Number 3. Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald is one of the greatest jazz performers to have ever lived, but she only got to this point after a childhood of great hardship. Born in Virginia in 1917, she moved to Yonkers in New York in the 20s with her mother and her new partner before starting school. Her mom died because of a car crash when she was 15 years old, and she moved to Harlem to live with her aunt the following year. Ella began to struggle at school, not least because she was expected to help out with illegal activities such as keeping watch for cops approaching a brothel. And she was put into a reform school which she ran away from. This began several months of homelessness for Ella, where she would earn small amounts of money by singing on street corners. Eventually, she went on to star at the Apollo Theater in 1934 and won an amateur singers' night. She started to become known in the area after this, and in the following year she was introduced to the bandleader Chick Webb, which led to her first hit, A Tisket, a Tasket, in 1938. She'd sing for the rest of her life and never looked back on this time. She rarely spoke about it in interviews, much preferring to focus on the music. Number 2. Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders set up what would become one of the most recognizable fast food brands in the world, but it was a long, arduous road to get there. He had a tough childhood, which saw his father die when he was young, and because his mother had to go out to work, he was responsible for looking after his younger siblings. He had a wide variety of jobs, but wasn't very good at keeping them for long enough to get anywhere, and after a failed marriage, he remarried at the age of 59. He would end up running a restaurant at a gas station, which is where he began to develop his renowned chicken recipe. But even this just provided a glimpse of success before a bypass was built that took traffic away from his promises and ended up with him being forced to sell for a loss. To try and get his franchise company off the ground, he then began to travel around the country in order to try and convince others to take up his recipes. This was an embarrassing time for him, and it saw him living out of his car with his wife for months at a time. They regularly didn't have enough money to eat and had to beg friends to help them out. But his incredible work ethic finally paid dividends. By 1964, by the time he turned 74, his chicken was being sold in more than 600 locations. He had 17 staff, was making a healthy profit, and sold the company to investors for $2 million. Number 1. Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain always knew that he wanted to be a musician, but even he had no idea how much of an influential and legendary rock superstar he would become. He had a troubled time growing up, though, and this led to a period of time when he was homeless. He was living with his mother during his second year of high school and decided to drop out 2 weeks before the end because he realized he didn't have enough credits to graduate. He was given a choice by his mom. He had to either get a job or leave the house. A week later, she had packed his clothes and belongings and he left, albeit occasionally sneaking back into her basement when he needed somewhere warm to stay. Apart from that, he was forced to stay with friends, and when that wasn't possible, he would sleep under the Yonge Street Bridge over the Wishkah River in Aberdeen, Washington. His experiences there influenced his later music. The river became important to him that it was the name of the second Nirvana album released after his death, and his time being homeless there was the inspiration for Something in the Way, the final title track on their most famous album, Nevermind. Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.